Hey guys, Brian Davis and Denny Sipley here from Spark Rental. Happy Tuesday,
Hello,
or
everyone.
or later days if you're listening to the podcast after the fact. But we do broadcast this live every Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, through our Spark Rental Facebook page. So it's not all pristine and perfect and edited and touched up and after the fact. It's raw and live. But the good thing about that is you guys get to ask us questions as we go and have a dialogue on here, and it's not just Denny and I talking at you. So last week we talked all about how to deal with bad contractors because I personally find that contractors are one of the most difficult parts of being a landlord, being a real estate investor. Denny's married to a contractor, so I know she agrees. Uh, and today we're talking about anti-landlord laws. So cities and states with extremely tenant-friendly laws that make life really difficult for landlords. Um, the eviction moratorium has really opened a lot of landlords' eyes to the not only the anti-landlord sentiment that's really been growing in this country for the last few years, but also how regulation can really impact your bottom line as a landlord. So, Denny, let's talk first about just the context of rising anti-landlord sentiment and regulation. Um, you know, eh, the calls for rent forgiveness that are becoming more and more shrill all the time. Um, I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that I get the balance. There are probably people out there that truly need help, but unfortunately, I think that this has been swayed more to a lot of the people that don't need help and are taking advantage of the system, and therefore, landlords, especially the ones that own 1 to 4 units that are, just making it, are really getting hurt right now. And
Well, I want to push back for 1 second here. I mean, there are a lot of people out there in the pandemic who did lose their jobs, right? They did need
mhm.
help, but didn't they get that help in the form of extended unemployment benefits? They were extended in two ways. One, they were extended time frame wise, right? Because most states historically they put like a 6 month cap on unemployment benefits, but that 6 month cap was removed during the pandemic and extended towards the latter part of this year in 2021, and they were also extended dollar wise. A lot of people were earning actually more from their unemployment benefits than they were earning from working. So, I mean, didn't weren't tenants already people who needed help? People who legitimately lost their jobs, weren't they already being given assistance with paying their bills through unemployment assistance?
Yes, I don't think it was right away, and I think there is a waiting period in between. And I think that just to be the devil's advocate here, and I'm probably not going to have fans for saying this, but I think that there is, good and bad on both sides, realistically. So we do have. Sorry, I thought I shut that off. See, we're live.
Yeah, we did mention that we're live, right?
um, I do believe that there were tenants that were hurt, but I think they're the ones that were quick to make sure that they caught things up. And as soon as any help or aid came to them, they took care of it. And then you have, unfortunately, which in my experience lately is the majority, are the ones that are taking advantage of a system. And unfortunately, there are good landlords that are getting hurt.
No question. But yeah, I mean, just listening to some of the anti-landlord rhetoric around the country, um, calls for permanent eviction moratoriums for some people from the far left, calls for widespread, massive rent bailouts and rent forgiveness. Um, I think it's really worrying as a landlord and as a real estate investor. Um, I worry about where we're headed from a regulation standpoint. Both federally and on the state and city level, in some of these more tenant-friendly states, which we'll get into in a minute, and some of these really particularly bad cities. And
Well,
by
and
the
I
way,
think there are, and again, I hate to get all too political here, but I,
but
I,
it's inherently political.
it
It just is
is,
what it is. Like,
but I think our government sets things up for people to be anti-landlord. I mean,
Well,
it's
sure. In a democracy, there are going to be way more tenants than there are landlords, and democracies are fundamentally a popularity contest, right? So
but I
that's just,
mean we look, everyone, we need landlords because if you didn't have landlords, you wouldn't have a place to live. I mean,
yeah.
truthfully, if you can't buy, then you need a landlord. And the idea, like I see these landlord hate groups on social media and things like that. And of course, there are some bad landlords, but for the most part, the people I know, they work hard and they do take care of their units. And it's just a shame that there's this kind of attitude out there. I mean, you're not going to walk into Walmart and because you are having hard times, you're going to just grab stuff off the shelf and chuck out of there.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
It's
Nobody's
called
yelling at
theft.
them. Right.
Yeah.
But yet when, somebody is blatantly like, we're not checking out stories, we're not doing anything like that, and we're just handing them free rent or sure, stay there for as long as you can because the CDA, who has no bearing in any of this anyway,
The
is telling
CDC.
you that CDC. I always do that. I always
Alphabet
call them
soup up in
CDA. An
Washington.
A for ASS. Sorry, but anyway, I get mad at that.
Well, so do I, and so do a lot of our readers. So we sent out a newsletter this morning talking about this broadcast, talking about the two interactive maps that we made, breaking down anti-landlord laws around the country. And by the way, Denny, if you could share a link to that. Um, so yeah, we heard back from a lot of landlords who are really upset about the way this is going. And Christina Colin just commented here. She makes a great point. She says the thing is not our responsibility to provide for our renters, to
Mm-mm.
provide them free housing. Why should we be subsidizing their housing?
Right.
Like you said, Denny, just because someone is out of work, that doesn't mean they can walk into a grocery store and just load up their cart with whatever they want for free and then walk out of the store, right?
Right.
Um, so Christina goes on to say, I think society has become too entitled, too sensitive, and expects too much without any effort. Um, Christina, I happen to agree with you. um, but as from the rest of you guys, let us know your thoughts on the matter. I mean, obviously, it is very controversial, and we want to hear your thoughts. This is an interactive show. Um, so let's dive in here, Denny, to talk about the state level because you have the state level landlord tenant laws, and then you also have some cities that layer on their own landlord tenant laws on top
Right.
of the state laws. So let's just do a really quick overview of what state landlord tenant laws look like and how they can be either more tenant friendly or more investor friendly.
Well, one of the things is how they handle security deposits. Let's start with that. Some states have separate landlord tenant sections of the law, just how on how the security deposits have to be handled, and some of them won't allow. There's normal wear and tear, but there's certain things that aren't considered normal wear and tear by some states that some people would think it. You know what I mean? There's like so much gray area, and the courts will favor a tenant. So if you're going to court and there's disputes there, most likely the tenant is going to win in that. There's oh my goodness, how you where you keep your security deposit, how much interest you're going to pay. I mean, they tell you when you can pick your nose, basically. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. There are some states that will say if the winter months are they give you a certain degree, and even the amount to me is a little odd because I wouldn't be cold at that point. I mean, I would. I mean, things like that, and one of the cities that shocked me was charging landlords for not getting on top of a heat repair. Well, I know that I managed an apartment complex and it was a boiler system, and the boiler system went down. Well, you don't fix a boiler system in even 24 hours. It took us a little while. Now, what we did do is we made sure everybody had a space heater. Now, if we were in the city that I'm speaking of, and I forget which one it is, we would have been fined. So I mean, it's just it's tough, and I know I tend to be a little softer on certain things. So I know Brian says a lot of like, don't invest in these cities. And I mean, sadly, some of us need to invest in these cities because housing needs to be provided. But
No one has to invest anywhere. I
no,
mean,
you're
you can
right. I
invest
mean,
wherever you want.
we don't. But I mean, I guess what astonishes me here too is what happens though is the landlords are going to stop. People will stop investing in these cities, and the prices are going to plummet, and then who gets hurt? It's like a lose-lose situation. But yet we still have these lawmakers tipping the scales.
Of course. So, and Kevin Thompson, to that point, says it's helping to create a rental shortage. These regulations encourage landlords to sell, especially when there is a current housing price boom, and also contributes to sky-high rent increases because of the same thing, right? Because
Hmm.
you have a rental shortage, so there's not enough supply, and effectively harming the people they are supposedly intending to help. And Kevin's 100% right. In fact, we had a woman, Marina, comment on that article with the interactive maps that we just shared.
Right.
She commented this morning about how she has a rental property in Portland, or had a rental property in Portland, which we're going to talk about in a minute as a prime example of a terrible city for landlords. And because of a recent set of laws that they just passed in Portland, anti-landlord laws, they're selling. And not only are they selling, but they're selling that house to a home buyer. So that unit is being taken off the
Right.
market, right? It's no longer a rental unit that's available in that city. And so that's, to Kevin's point, that's exactly what's happening. Landlords are just unloading their units in these cities, driving up rents and driving down the supply. So yeah, I mean, you can't regulate your way to just make the market whatever you want it to be.
Mm-mm.
Um, anyway, so a couple other quick comments about state laws. So some states have very slow eviction timelines. In others, it's a little more streamlined. They could have very low limits on security deposits, such as 1 month rent, 1.5 months rent,
Right.
as opposed to letting the landlord charge what they want. They could put low limits on fees, like late fees or NSF fees, insufficient funds fees, which are bounce check fees, basically.
And
So,
they have forced amount of time before you can even collect a late fee.
yeah, and in some cases it's really long. I
Yeah.
mean, in some cases it can be 30 or 60 days that when the landlord is not allowed to charge a late fee. So, a few examples of particularly bad states as far as landlord-tenant laws. Vermont is not landlord-friendly. Delaware is not landlord-friendly. Arizona, New Jersey, Hawaii, Rhode Island. These are states that are not
Massachusetts, I
landlord-friendly at
throw
all.
that one in there.
Massachusetts. But I want to let's drill down to the city level. So every state has its own landlord-tenant laws, right? Some are more landlord-friendly, some are more tenant-friendly. Most cities do not have their own landlord-tenant laws; they simply follow the state laws. But some cities impose even stricter landlord-tenant laws than the state laws, and these cities tend to be really bad places for landlords to invest, just places where you don't want to own rental properties. So, and we're not going to spend too much time on each one, otherwise we'll be here all day. But let's just quickly walk through the 10 worst cities in America for landlord-tenant laws. So Portland being number one, actually, which is where Marina was saying that she's right in the middle of selling her rental property because of the anti-landlord laws there. And we'll give you a quick. So they don't. Portland, for example, does not let landlords non-renew tenants without having, quote,
A
just
reason.
cause.
Right.
So the end of the lease comes along and it becomes one direct or unilateral, where only the tenant can can choose to not renew the lease. The landlord must renew the lease if the tenant wants to. They restrict rent increases.
Yeah, they even restrict amounts.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they require the landlord to pay relocation assistance to tenants for a wide range of reasons. It's just nutty. So
that to me was crazy when I was looking into some of these that relocation assistance. Really? Why don't we put them up in a hotel and room service?
Yeah, sign right into the Hilton.
Serious.
All right, so Deni, what's number 2 on the list? Worst landlord cities in the
Number
country.
2 is New York City, and I'm sure most people who have, heard New York City, you know New York
Not a
City with,
surprise.
yeah, I mean, they have the rent control, and oh my goodness, there is who can move in, who can move out, and that's craziness. And there's organizations for tenants, and there's organizations for tenants. I mean, there's so much help for the renters in New York, just to make sure that the landlords are doing what they want them to do, basically. I mean, so New York
Tenants,
is expensive.
oh, it's crazy expensive. Yeah. Yeah, tenants get free attorneys in New York City when the
Free
landlord
legal
goes to
help.
evict
Yep.
them. So the tenant breaks the lease and then the city gives them a free attorney to help them stay in their property even though they broke the lease agreement.
Owners can't even remove their units from rent stabilization. There's like this whole protocol they have to go through, and the likelihood that it is removed is slim to none.
Yeah.
So you
That's
have
nutty.
no control. You basically buy a property that you have no control over. That's to me what it seems like in New York. Sorry, New York.
Hey, I have never owned any rental units there. I will never own any rental units there, you know,
And Christina, you're
because it's
right.
not.
New York City is another beast, but it's different in other areas. There is like outer areas in New York that it's not that bad there. And
Sure.
since you bring that up, I drop us to number 10 on the list, which is where I'm from, which is Philadelphia. Now, Pennsylvania as a whole is more landlord friendly. When I was managing properties in the suburbs, I could get somebody out of an apartment in sometimes 2 weeks if the courts weren't busy. It wasn't that hard. Philadelphia, a year is not unheard of. 8 months, I mean, that's not unheard of. I was evicting somebody. The last person I evicted in Philly was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and that's when I said no more. No more. I won't manage in Philly or anything. I've had people ask me to manage the properties in Philly, and I've turned them down because it's just ridiculous. It's like, yeah, you can't, and I don't want to sit. It's aggravating. Even cash for keys can be aggravating. Oh my God, it's
Oh
just,
yeah,
and yet
endless red tape.
Pennsylvania is not. Pennsylvania itself is not a bad. You can go to Pittsburgh or some of the outer lying areas, and it's nothing like Philadelphia.
Well, so we skipped some cities there. We went from
We
number 2 to
did.
number 10. So, Denny, give us just a really quick overview of number 3 on the list and why we shouldn't invest there.
Well, Washington D.C. Go figure. um, they too. Not only do you have to get a certificate of occupancy in DC, but you also have to get an actual business license, a housing business license. Um, it's you have to register. Not only that, you also have to register with the rental accommodation division. Um, it's just there's so many divisions that get involved here that anything like a tenant can complain about something, and then they can complain to one of those divisions, and then that's all you need is one of them to step in an apartment. And I know you know what I'm talking about, Brian, because once you get an inspector from one of these,
Oh,
um,
they'll rip your unit
oh
apart.
my goodness, that you're looking
Yeah.
at, a plug that was broken to the whole place needs to be completely redid or whatever. But I mean, it's
Yep.
ridiculous. And
And you'll
wash,
never be able to get the tenant out of there. They'll go a year without paying rent, and
yes,
yeah,
and
they'll find every loophole in the book to
oh
stay
my
in the unit.
goodness.
Yeah.
Washington also provides very out there for the tenants all their rights. We got to tell them their rights, and one of the craziest things, Brian, I found with Washington is the size requirements for the how many people in a bedroom.
Oh yeah.
That was crazy to me,
Which
but
again hurts the tenants because a lot of lower income tenants, they might want to put multiple children in a bedroom, maybe multiple adults in a
mhm,
bedroom, sharing a room, to save money, right? Because maybe they don't have a whole lot of money and they're trying to save money by having more people in one home.
right.
Um, but DC prohibits it. allegedly to
Yeah,
protect
it's
the tenants. So, it's a classic case of, just like we were talking about with Kevin earlier, how, these protectionist policies ends up hurting the people they were designed to protect. So,
exactly. And also they have heavy regulations around when you can charge late fees and all of those things. So DC's probably a place not to hang your rental sign in.
yeah, and right up the road in Baltimore is number 4.
I'll let you explain that one.
Well, it's my hometown. I'm from Baltimore. I love Baltimore, but it's a very troubled city. They actually just recently put into an effect a quote, no, what is it, no evictions without just cause, but it's not actually
Oh,
eviction. It's just non-renewing tenants at the end of their lease term. And there's all kinds of other crazy laws in Baltimore. You have to register with both a city authority and a state authority to pay fees to both. You have to, in between every single tenancy, you need to have a lead paint inspection, which is difficult to pass, by the way. It's very difficult to pass. And there's endless red tape in Baltimore and rules that make life really hard on landlords. You have to put the security deposit in an interest-bearing account, and you have to pay the tenant interest, but you have to pay the tenant way more interest than what you can actually earn by putting money in a checking account or a savings account. So it's crazy. Anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in any one city here. So number 5 on the list is Detroit in Michigan.
yes.
Now, again, our most recent co-investing deal, we're partnered with Drew Sidgett, who's based in Detroit or right outside Detroit, and we bought a rental property there to fix up, but it's not actually in the city of Detroit. It's in the surrounding metro area. And to Christina's point earlier, often you'll have these super protective cities in states that are actually
Right.
have reasonable landlord-tenant laws. Like Christina said, there's no rent control in upstate New York. So you can invest around the outskirts of some of these cities in many cases, just not within city
Same thing with
borders.
Pennsylvania. Most of
Yeah,
them. Yeah.
yeah. So Kevin Thompson says I would never invest in any of these cities mentioned for the reasons you've stated, especially after 2020. He said, on the flip side, the reason some people do is because certain areas like Hawaii, Southern California, New York City have experienced accelerated appreciation of value. And even if it's a pain to be a landlord or even break even, it's worth it financially speaking years down the road. But I still don't recommend it, is what he
Well,
says.
I think that we forget there's a piece in there that's not really financial, but it's aggravation. And there is a cost to aggravation.
No
And
question.
I think that sometimes I would rather make less and have less aggravation. Um, and that's something that you have to take into consideration too.
Yeah, yeah, no question. And Christina says there are some states that are super friendly to landlords, like Arkansas, but rents are so low and not much and not much investment. Why? Um, so some landlords like to invest in more affordable real estate. Um, there's a diversification angle there, right? You could potentially buy 5 properties in a low, a cheaper market for the same price. You could buy 1 property in a more expensive market. Some people don't like to invest in lower cost real estate. And we're, aside from things like crime or, bad tenants or anything like that, there are plenty of parts of the country where those are not issues in affordable markets. Some people just don't like to do it because they think that the headaches that come along with each door aren't justified by the cash flow provided by each door. That just comes down to your priorities as an investor. Some people would rather buy, like I said, a bunch of these lower cost units spread around for the diversification value. Maybe one of those will be in a neighborhood that pops up in value, or not. But other people don't like it. They'd rather invest more money in one property that potentially cash flows more. So that's just a judgment call for you as an investor.
Right.
So we can wrap this up with the cities here pretty quickly. So Chicago, Illinois is number 6, very unfriendly to landlords.
Mm-hmm.
And Chicago, by the way, Denny, is the city with the heat ordinance that you were referencing earlier. So
Right.
landlords can be fined up to $500 per day if the heat breaks. So that adds up really fast. And keep in mind too, when you have a major winter storm blow through a city like Chicago and knock out a bunch of people's HVAC or power or whatever, um, sometimes you can't get contractors in very quickly because every contractor in the city is out running around trying to
Take
fix
care
all
of
these
things.
broken properties. So
Especially now with the shortage we have as it is.
yeah, exactly. Anyway, something to keep in mind. Number 7 on the list is Los Angeles. Major rent control in
Big time.
LA. A statistic that blew my mind about LA and rent control: 85% of the rental units in LA are under rent control. 85%.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that when I saw that stat. Um, anyway, yeah, there's crazy laws in LA. San Francisco is number 8. Again, just nutty laws in
Limits
San
on rent
Francisco.
increases and
Oh
yeah.
yeah. You can't have quote no cause evictions, which is again what we were talking about, how you can't non-renew tenants at the end of their lease if you want to. The only plot twist on this entire list, the only surprise was DeKalb, Illinois, which I may be mispronouncing, by the way. But all the rest of these are super uh, progressive cities that none of these are plot twists, none of these are surprises. The only one that was a little surprising was DeKalb, just because it's a small city many of us have never heard of.
Right.
um, but yeah, they have all kinds of goofy laws. And then of course, Denny, you mentioned Philadelphia rounding out the top 10 list at number 10. And I want to give an honorary mention to Seattle, is another example of a really tenant friendly city that we're actually going to be adding to this list, because it's also super tenant friendly, very anti-landlord in its regulation. Um, so I I personally will never invest in any of these cities again. I have owned many properties in Baltimore over the course of my career, and honestly, it was just miserable. I'll never do it again. Um, I mean,
And
I
it's
tell this.
funny how it's different because my father was a big real estate investor, and most of his real estate investing was in Philly, was in Philadelphia. But it was
Well, the
so
laws are different
different.
then, I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
so different back then.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, the last eviction that I had to do in Baltimore City, it took me almost an entire year. It took 11 months to get this person out, because they were what we call professional tenants, where they just move from property to property, don't pay the rent, and use every loophole in the book to stay in the property as long as possible. And you can get away with that in cities like Baltimore that are super landlord friendly. I'm sorry, tenant friendly. And yeah, when he moved out, he punched holes through every single cabinet, scratched up all the floors, ruined. I mean, it was, yeah, the whole property. I actually ended up abandoning that property. That's how it was a total loss. Um, and again, there's one more unit off the market, right? So, so Denny, any last comments you have about anti-landlord regulation across the country, state level, city level? Any thoughts on this before we call this episode complete?
I think that I mean, look, some of us have properties already in the cities, and we have to kind of navigate. And if you're in that position, just be very aware of the laws and the regulations there so that you can be ready. Because I think that like when I was telling you about the place in Philly where the last eviction in Philly, and they have a fair housing commission there, and I'm thinking fair housing means
Don't discriminate.
discrimination.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it doesn't. It's a place where tenants can go and rile up anything, to be honest with you, and it's considered unfair housing. And that's what this particular woman did. And there were legal fees. Oh my gosh, it was crazy. But I never heard of this Fair Housing Commission. I heard of it, but I didn't think that's what it was. And I think it's important for everybody, if you have any properties anywhere, you should know your laws big time,
No question.
because you can't play ignorance in this stuff anymore.
No,
Not that you could before, but
no, you need to know the local laws, and you need to abide by them, or else you'll get in all kinds of trouble. Fines. There are criminal penalties in a lot of these cities, by the way.
which is crazy to me.
Criminal penalties on landlords who violate these landlord-tenant laws. Christina says sometimes we have to act like gangsters. LOL. Yeah, well, maybe Vinny needs to show up with a baseball bat, right?
Serious. I'm gonna get a gangsta T-shirt for my gangsta landlord.
Kevin Thompson says, "Good info. Thanks, guys." And Zenny, the other option is you can sell if you have properties in some of these cities, like Marina, the example we were giving earlier, the woman who commented on the article this morning. She's sold. They're selling their rental property and getting out, and they're going to go and turn around and put that money in markets that actually want people to invest in rental housing there.
Right.
So where they will probably earn higher returns for far fewer headaches, and that's really the bottom line here. And it ends up hurting the tenants who these legislations are designed to protect. So yeah, it's totally counterproductive legislation. All right. Any final thoughts, Deni?
No, I did put in the chat section or the chat area that we have state summaries for most of the states that will give you a background on what you can and can't do statewide. And then, of course, we have the article that gives you some background on your cities. But check your cities out if you are investing in them.
Absolutely. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We will catch you next week at 2:00 Eastern on the Spark Rental Facebook page. Have a great week.
See you later, guys.